Blessings, good evening on a stormy Tuesday night. Tuesday night is Q&A night, so hopefully the Dhamma can pacify the storm, or at least give some place of calm within the storm. So tonight the first question is, can you please explain what the term from Ajahn Kalyano means? There is no one to be, no one to become. No one to be, no one to become. Well, it's an expression of not self, anatta. So it's a reflection that one can use to measure one's own thinking and views on things. Because the opposite of anatta is atta, self. And the Buddha pointed out, and Ajahn Kalyano also, that where there's attachment to the idea or clinging to a sense of self, there'll be suffering. Once you have a sense of self, then you have something you want, something you want to have, something you want to be, hold on to. So in Buddhism we have craving to become as a source of suffering. The Buddha, the central teaching the Buddha realized, or the truth that the Buddha realized on the night of his enlightenment, we call that the dependent arising, the way suffering arises for a human being in their experience. And he explained the various causal factors that arise dependent on other factors that lead to suffering in our experience. So it all begins with avijja, ignorance, wrong views, delusion, not understanding the Four Noble Truths. And in conjunction with other causes and conditions, this gives rise to craving for sense objects, craving to be, craving to not be, craving to become, craving not to become, which supports upadana, clinging, and then bhava, becoming. So becoming is considered, it's like the manifestation of the sense of self, coming originally from ignorance, unawareness. We create a sense of self in this body and this mind. So the Buddha talked about body and mind as 5 khandhas: form, physical form, feeling, perception, thought formations, sense consciousness. These 5 khandhas become what we cling to. The mind clings to the khandhas as self. And this gives rise to craving, clinging, becoming. Becoming is like the potential for birth in every moment of consciousness. So from every moment that we're alive and we still have ignorance affecting our mind, we're not fully mindful, fully insightful into the way things are, we have becoming arising based on craving and attachment. It's the potential to do things, become, be, make things, make karma, our experience of the world, the kind of world we've created for ourselves through our karma, through our actions. It's becoming, and it leads on to birth. Birth meaning both the next moment of existence, but also the next life as well. So as long as you have the wanting to be, wanting to become, then you're still making karma, you're still creating this sense of self, you're creating the causes for more birth. And of course birth is always followed by aging, sickness, death. It brings with it different experiences, painful experiences, physical pain, mental pain, despair, grief, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. As long as there's birth, there's going to be suffering. As long as there's becoming, there's going to be birth. If there's no becoming, there'll be no birth. If there's no clinging, there'll be no becoming. If there's no craving, there'll be no clinging. So you can follow it all back to the origin, avijja, ignorance. So if there's no ignorance, if you remove that from your experience, then there'll be no craving, clinging, becoming, birth, suffering. So this is the central explanation of suffering, its cause, but also how to abandon suffering in the Buddhist teachings. So Ajahn Chah is kind of summarizing all of that wordy explanation, and there's plenty more you can read, the suttas and different explanations, summarizing it all in just, there's no one to be, no one to become. You know, if one sees through this process that creates self and the suffering, and realizes actually there's no self in it, then the wanting to be, wanting to become starts to dissolve, disappear. The mind doesn't cling to the physical form of the body, feelings, perceptions, thought formation, sense consciousness. Sees through them. Sees them, we say, as elements, rather than as a person, rather than taking your body as a person. We say that, well, you can see when you practice developing this Buddhist path, samatha vipassana, mindfulness, insight, you can get to the point where you see that this body is not a self, it's just a collection of physical elements. And that idea of it being a self that leads partly, is part of the reason why we want to become something, be somebody, is actually a delusion, because it's just a collection of physical elements and there's no self in it. As long as we haven't seen that, then the mind keeps wanting this body to, number one, to keep existing, keep living. What do we fear most is death. We want to experience pleasant things, pleasant feelings with this body. We don't want pain. We want it to look good. So that's a big part of our becoming, isn't it? We want to be somebody. So partly that's expressed through the way we dress and put makeup on and present ourselves to the world. Our identity, our tribe, what we identify with, fashion, wealth, gender and so on. A huge part of our life is about how we present ourselves physically to the world and what we identify with as self in this body, in the way we treat this body. But on a deeper level, we have the identification with feelings and perceptions and thoughts. That's also becoming. The ideas we have, what we want for our future, who we want to be, I want to be. When you're growing up as a kid, they always ask you, what do you want to be? You want to be, maybe you identify with a certain job, or you want to be happy, or you want to be rich, or you want to be famous, or you may want to be nothing, but you can still have becoming, wanting to be nothing. Often that's a reaction with aversion, isn't it, to some suffering you've had. Then you just go to aversion, you say, I don't want anything, because you're so fed up with life. That can often lead to thoughts of self-harm, even suicide. It's another form of becoming. It's just wanting not to become, not to have. If you've experienced extreme suffering, then you might think in that way. It's identifying with this body and feelings and thoughts as self. It's where becoming arises. That's what we have to investigate. And Ajahn Chara is giving us this simple reflection. There's no one to be. You take the burden off your mind. There's no one to be. On the conventional level, we still have a person here. We have a name. We have this identity that we have. But on the deeper level that you develop through your practice of samatha and vipassana, you're removing this identity or the delusion of identity, just seeing the true nature of phenomena. There's elements, physical elements, mental elements. So when mindfulness and insight is clear, maybe as seeing, what is seeing? You have an eye, you have a healthy eye, you have light, something to be seen, and then eye consciousness arises. But in all of that, there's no self. There's no one to become with this seeing. It's just seeing is taking place. It's just seeing in the seeing, hearing in the hearing. But because of craving, clinging, attachment, we create a self in that. So it's I am seeing. So then I want to see the things that I like, and I don't want to see the things that I don't like. And once you've got a self, then you start choosing, and you have this becoming. So you keep being born into reactions of liking and disliking with seeing or hearing or tasting. This is all part of becoming, and ultimately leads to birth. So Ajahn Chah often would talk about this in response to people who are maybe going wrong in their meditation, because even in meditation you can have becoming, even though you're meditating to end becoming, get beyond it, you still can meditate with the desire to be somebody, to be a good meditator, to be peaceful, to attain jhana, to attain nibbana. And this is all forms of becoming as well, to be somebody, something, to attain. Or we go into wanting to get away from or get rid of all the opposite of that, which is the lack of peace in the mind. I want to get rid of my suffering, get rid of my confusion, delusion. That's also a form of becoming. So Ajahn Chah was just giving simple reflections to people at different times. You'd say, well, there's no one to be, no one to become. And people would say, I want to be an arahant, I want to be a bodhisattva. And there's nothing to be, nothing to become. It's just leading them to the paramatta satya, the ultimate reality, to cut through the attachment to the immediate conventional reality, the identification with a sense of self that we keep falling into, which brings us suffering. So if there's no one to be, nothing to be, then there's no one to suffer either. So suffering can't find a place to establish itself in your consciousness, because there's no one to be. So the arahant is like that. The suffering can't arise because there's no one there. So Ajahn Chah is considered somebody who personified or embodied this emptiness and no one to be, no one to become very well in the way he was. He seemed often very empty, and these amazing eyes that seemed to be kind of just displaying that there's no one home, no sense of self, non-attachment. And the way he acted would constantly be displaying non-self in different ways, non-attachment, non-clinging to views and opinions and knowledge and rituals and practices and the things that people cling to. He would often be not clinging to them. And so people would get a very good idea of what it is to not be anyone. But he also reminded us not to be foolish, and he said, well, when there's the time is right, well, you have to be somebody. So he said, if there's no one to be, no one to become, then no one will do the sweeping in the monastery. So you still have to do the sweeping. Even arahants have to sweep the leaves, one of the duties of monks, even if you're an arahant. So on one level there is someone there, and it's correct to be somebody when it's time to do the chores, it's time to do the chanting, time to eat your meal. There's somebody there. You're being somebody. But the idea is on the deeper level not to attach or cling to the sense of self in those activities or to the person who's doing those activities. But on the deeper level, there's no one to be, no one to become. You just bring that up almost like a mantra, and then your meditation can quickly dissolve the sense of self as you're meditating. You don't have to be anyone or get anything. When you really see that, it's very restful and peaceful for the mind, because you realize wanting to be somebody and get something is always a cause of stress, suffering, agitation and confusion. If everyone could see that there's no one to be, no one to become, there'd be no conflicts between people, no competition, no clinging to views and opinions, no clinging to selfishness, the world would be a much better place. Whether you're talking about an individual not being anybody or the whole world, it's the way to go beyond the suffering, isn't it? So you can look at this on just the sort of the simple reflection. There's no one here, no one to be. Or go into it, read the suttas, study the words of the Buddha, and you can analyze it, pick it apart, and then meditate on it. Another question. Good morning, Ajahn. Can you, one, explain with regards to the robe offering? What are the occasions when you can offer robes to monks other than the katina or in the memory of a deceased person? Well, Buddhist monks obviously wear robes, monks and nuns wear robes, so robe cloth is a common traditional offering to them. And you can offer a robe or robe cloth at any time. But there will be certain rituals or ceremonies that do it in a formal way. So we have katina, that 1 month period after the rains retreat. If you have a group of monks living together, then you can offer a katina cloth maybe. So that may be white cotton cloth that can be taken away and sewn into a katina robe and dyed according to the Vinaya, the monastic discipline. Or you could, at any time of the year, you can offer a papa, forest cloth. That's a cloth offering, and you might offer that in a formal way. Or you could offer robe cloth as sanghadana. It's a sanghadana offering. So sometimes you see people do that. They offer a ready sewn robe or just unsewn robe cloth, maybe together with other kinds of requisites. Or people offer robe cloth before an ordination to a new monk, or just to an individual monk or group of monks at any time when they have faith, they want to offer something useful. They know monks use robes, so they offer the robe cloth. Or occasionally they'll get a robe made. If you get a robe made to offer to a monk, try and get it made according to the Vinaya, so that the monk can actually wear it, because so many robes are produced commercially, but they're not made in accordance with the Vinaya. So particularly forest monks won't be able to wear them, because we're quite strict on following the rules the way the Buddha had us sew and cut and sew and dye robes. If it's not done properly, then we can't wear it. So if you're in doubt, you can offer the robe cloth, so white cotton that can be dyed, nylon or Man-made fibre won't usually accept dye very well, so cotton fabric is the best. And you can do this at any time. And as you said, very common to offer robe cloth for the deceased in memory of the deceased at a funeral, say, or after somebody's passed away as part of the funeral ceremonies. Offer robe cloth. In the time of the Buddha we called this bangsakula cloth. And sometimes it would be the cloth that actually wraps around the corpse. Sometimes it's just cloth offered at a funeral, placed on the coffin or near the corpse for monks to take away. So that is a very common time when people offer robes, robe cloth. But it's really up to you. When you're ready or you have a particular reason that you want to make merit, make some good karma, practice generosity, support the Sangha, or you can choose when that may be. Or it may be at a particular time like Katina, or you may do it for somebody who's passed away. Another question. My sister is very jealous and a competitive person. She is able to speak every single word with aggressiveness towards anyone. I feel very stressed whenever I have to talk to her, and her personality only pushes me away without being able to feel metta towards her. Ajahn, can you please suggest how to get along with people like that? Well, the Buddha encouraged us to practice universal loving-kindness or metta, so in all directions to all beings in all realms without exception. That's why we call it universal. So that includes difficult sisters, difficult brothers, difficult parents, difficult children, difficult friends, difficult neighbours, difficult work colleagues, you name it, they're all in there. No excuse. It includes creatures, difficult creatures that you don't like, whatever creatures you don't like, cockroaches, scorpions, and whatever else. You may have a phobia for spiders. It includes everything. So that's your aim. Of course, there are people who are more difficult than others, but that's part of your practice, isn't it? You're aiming to purify your mind from bias, from aversion, thoughts and views rooted in aversion. So maybe your difficult sister will be the cause for your enlightenment. These people are the challenges we have to deal with. Have I got enough metta for this person? If I haven't, why not? And go back to square one. Why don't I have metta for this person? And I understand, maybe this person is difficult, they're aggressive, they bully, they make life difficult for you in many ways perhaps, but you still have to come back to cultivating metta. You know, the simile of the saw, the Buddha said, even if they grab you, the bad guys grab you and start sawing off your limb, if you harbour a single thought of aversion for that person or those people, you're not following what the Buddha's taught. So that's the challenge, to bring up the metta. Of course, you might not like the person. You may still find them difficult, tiring, challenging. The idea is to free your own mind from aversion, anger, ill will, or even hatred. And who is the best example for this? Well, the Buddha himself, his own cousin, Devadatta, was probably worse than any sister or brother. Devadatta was out to get the Buddha, tried to kill him, split the Sangha, so jealous, so competitive with the Buddha. It's just like big trouble. But even Devadatta succumbed to the metta of the Buddha and said, oh, you've never treated me badly, you've always treated me with kindness and compassion. So that's our aim. So perhaps on a practical level, if you have this person, well, you minimize your contact with them. If they're always stirring up anger or bringing up negative thoughts in your mind when you're with them, well, minimize your contact with them. But if they're a family member, you won't be able to completely avoid them, perhaps. So before you see them, always establish your mind in metta. Maybe do a metta meditation before you meet them. And try and maintain your metta as a priority as you're talking to them, listening to them, interacting with them. And if you know that person, then you know their character. So then you don't be surprised when they're aggressive or they talk in a harsh way or a coarse way or act in ways that bring up aversion in you. Don't be surprised because you already know them. So think it through before you go to talk to them or have anything to do with them. Just think it through, prepare yourself mentally, establish metta. And then from metta comes karuna, compassion, because that person is probably suffering in their life. And you're looking beyond the immediate dislike of their behavior to see underlying it, there's causes for that behavior in their life, in their mind, and they're suffering for some reason or other. Through a lack of awareness, they don't realize how they're affecting other people, or they have some strong pain in their physical being or in their mental being that comes out in their speech, their actions. And this is all worthy of compassion. So metta leads on to karuna, compassion. And you can also develop mudita. Sometimes think of your sister's good qualities and the good that she's done. She must have done good things in her life somewhere along the line. If it's a sister, you should know her, so spend time thinking of the good in her. She's not all bad, there'll be good there that you can be happy about. The good that she's done, the good karma she's developed. Be happy for her. And encourage that in any way you can. Subtly, indirectly. If you can't talk to her directly, then indirectly just try and encourage her to do more good, which may bring her mind up. She'll be less difficult. So you have to cultivate your own metta, karuna, mudita, and encourage this in her as well, in whatever way you can. But then also the hardest one of all, upekkha. If she is unskillful in her speech and actions, you know it, you see it, and there's nothing you can do. Well, you have to also cultivate upekkha and just accept this is the karma of her life, and your connection with her as a sister is just the way it is. And don't create further suffering out of this situation. You don't make a problem out of it, don't suffer with it, just know it and accept it with equanimity. This is how it is. And there are some people that perhaps your whole life you can never get on their good side, you can never strike up a warm, friendly, easy relationship with them. Some people you can and some you can't. So you practice upekkha and accept that as just a fact of life, it's just the way it is. So mentally you're not creating suffering around this problem or making it a problem. It's just the way it is. Just like those animals you don't like. If you don't like cockroaches, there's nothing you can do about it. There's millions of cockroaches in the world. They're going to be left after nuclear war. They're going to be here. Maybe they'll inherit the earth after foolish humans have destroyed it. But they're going to be here for a long time and you can't get rid of them. So you might as well learn to be at peace with them. If you see one, well, just avoid it. If cockroaches are the thing that brings up aversion. But you can't change them, so just accept them. And move on. Don't dwell on them, don't make a big problem out of them. And even people, we can do the same. Don't dwell on it, don't make a problem out of it, just move on and get on with your life and do the best you can. Really, I always say, if somebody makes you angry or is difficult, and they're your teacher, so You can say thank you to them. Every time they get you upset, annoyed, angry, just say thank you. Now I'm seeing my own craving and attachment, my own becoming. They're helping you to realize the Dhamma. The last question today. Some lay people always like to say, it is the same whether one practices in the lay life or in the monastery. However, as far as I can see, it is very different. I wonder, can Ajahn please say some more about this? Well, they're both right. Yes, on one level you could say the practice doesn't change wherever you are. Lay life, monastery. You have your 5 khandhas here, body and mind. The nature of these 5 khandhas is they're impermanent, they're suffering, they're not self. That doesn't change whether you're in a monastery or in the lay life. And the path of practice, the Noble Eightfold Path out of suffering, getting you to see that these 5 khandhas are not self, so that you stop clinging to them, doesn't change whether you're in lay life or in the monastery. But of course, we also have to accept that this practice is not always easy and will take anything that helps us. And the one big help is to stay in a place that's conducive to the practice. Like the Buddha said, if you want to be mindful, one of the best conducive factors for bringing up mindfulness is to live with other people who are practicing mindfulness or who are already mindful. So where will you find mindful people? Well, generally in a monastery. Doesn't mean to say everyone in a monastery is perfectly mindful, but everybody is more aware of mindfulness and practicing mindfulness. So in a monastery, people tend to be more mindful of their speech, their actions. They've got a goal, which is to abandon the mental defilements. So it's a place set up and dedicated to that goal. In the household life, you may have that goal, or somebody else may have that goal, but maybe many people don't have that goal. And the people around you, maybe their goal is wealth, fame, fortune, or if they're very depressed, maybe it's just to hurt and destroy other people. There's every kind of person in this world. And they may not be following the Noble Eightfold Path, they may not be understanding the way to practice for the end of suffering yet. Which is sad, but it's true. So we have to accept that truth. If you're in the lay life, you make the best of your situation. So if you're living alone or just 1 or 2 people, maybe you can make your home into a sanctuary, a place of practice to the best of your ability, and that can help. But if you're living with a family or other people who may not be Buddhist and not practicing, well, of course then more obstacles come up because they may be interested in following. Generally in the lay life, the danger is following sensuality. There's more opportunity for that. So we follow our sensual desire, which leads to lots of confusion, disappointment, competition, addictions, obsessions, despair, all kinds of things. And that's, as we know, that's what the nature of this world. It's full of suffering. You go to a monastery and you still have these mental defilements affecting you, but a monastery is a place very simple. There's less to distract you, less opportunity to indulge sensually. You tend to be steered towards Nibbana more. You're hearing the Dhamma, practicing the Dhamma. It's a simple, quiet place. Maybe if it's outside of the city, then it's even more ideal. There's no guarantee that you'll reach Nibbana any quicker. That depends on how well you apply yourself to cultivating the path. So a layperson could go quicker than a monk. It's quite possible. Depends on their virya and their effort and their faith and all the different faculties, spiritual faculties, how well they mature and develop, how quick they develop. So a layperson could potentially attain to the Maggaphala Nibbana quicker than a monastic. Depends on that person's individual karma. But if we're generalizing, well, generally the monastery is a more suitable environment for the practice. Of course, if you're not ready for the monastic environment, you don't yet have a lot of renunciation, so you still have a lot of desire for sensuality, then coming into a monastery can be quite stressful. So that is one thing to consider. Some people maybe are not ready for monastic living. Like we had a guy the other day who rang up and says he wants to come and stay, and then he asked, do we provide dinner? No, you don't get dinner in a monastery. If you want dinner, stay at home, and that's fine. If you want to keep the 5 precepts, meditate, but you want dinner as well, well then the home life, the lay life is the right place for it. If you come into the monastery, you're going to be without dinner. So you have to be ready for that. But actually it's not that hard. People who live in monasteries will tell you, you get used to it. And there's many other things you give up in a monastery. You give up sex, you give up entertainments, sports, all the different entertainments, fashion, money, all the kind of things that people are involved with in the world. You're giving a lot of that up. So if you're not ready, that can put a bit of pressure on you, and some people find it too difficult, just too confusing, too stressful. So that's fine. Practice the 5 precepts at home, or maybe learn to practice the 8 precepts at home. You can do it. So you have to know yourself and where you're at in your practice, but by all means try out the monastic life, see whether it's conducive, and maybe the challenge of the monastic training increases your effort, so you go further in your practice. So that we just have to try, find out. But one can practice in the lay life or in the monastery. The important thing is to keep practicing, isn't it? Keep your faith, keep practicing. Don't give up and don't get strayed. Until one is Aryapugala, Sotapanna, established on the path, established in faith, in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, then there's always the danger that one can stray into wrong views, wrong beliefs, superstitions, wrong practices, and go backwards or just get lost in the world. So probably less chance of straying from the path in the monastery, but still it's not a guarantee. Really it's up to the individual how sincere they are and how they commit to the practice. So wherever you are, whether you're in a monastery or at home, we wish you well in your practice. May you progress in the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, Samatha, Vipassana. Whatever you can do in this area, I think will benefit you, whether you're at home or in the monastery. I'd encourage you to keep going. Life is short. We don't know what lies ahead, so practice as much as you can while you can.